Don't miss this blast from the demon's past with the realms of chaos lost in the damned.
Spiky bits.
What's up, hobby maniacs? I'm Baer with you again today, and we are talking some Nurgle. Now, of course, the new Demons book is on the way, or by the time we get this video out the door, already out, I would imagine. But it isn't too late to go back and visit the beginnings of the demonic incursions, or the demonic legions, back in 1990, at least for Nurgle and Tzeentch. This book was The Lost and the Damned. It came out in 1990. It was the follow-up to The Realms of Darkness, or The Slaves to Darkness. Neither books I had, because my mom would not let me buy them, because Dungeons & Dragons is bad. I'm sure if some of you were around in the 80s or 90s, you remember those days too, but hey, we can only do what our parents let us at the end of the day, or, you know, sneak some stuff in when we can. So we're going to put this on the table and take a closer look at this book and its brother book, The Slaves to Darkness. And there they are. Now, we've already done a video on The Slaves to Darkness earlier in the year. This actually was available at Warhammer Open, or 40K Open Day, or whatever you want to call it, there in Nottingham at Warhammer World. You could get a brand new copy of this book here at that event. I guess it's a new show exclusive. This is the original from 1988. It took them 2 years to get out The Lost and the Damned, the follow-up to this book. And the format changed quite a bit between the two books. Now these, like I said, I never bought these books back in the day, so I never had them to keep and hold on to. I read them in the 90s as I got older, but, you know, a lot of this was kind of lost on me until I really started getting into, you know, playing 40K in 3rd edition, which was the late 90s, and played it some in 2nd edition, but, you know, in high school, it's hard to kind of focus on that stuff and remember a lot of it for the most part. These are on loan from my friend Matt, who very graciously loaned me these, and finally got around to doing both of the videos this year on these, which is awesome, because these are literal cornerstones of everything chaos out there. Now, what's cool about this first book here that came out in 1988, this has all the background on the Inquisition and the Grey Knights, and a lot of stuff from Warhammer Fantasy, which doesn't matter anymore. You know, if you played 4th, 5th edition, I forget which edition was around here. I think it was 5th edition when this book came out, by the time it rolled around. Then there was a lot of info in there on this. Same with this book here. We're not really going to cover a lot of that, unfortunately, because well, it kind of doesn't make sense, because now we have Age of Sigmar, and, you know, that's GW's way to, you know, copyright a lot of the stuff that has been influenced over the years, and that they've come out with. It's you know, for the most part, squarely their IP by this point. So this book here is about 300 pages. It came out in 1988, like I said. It's a little bit different format, like we talked about. Here's some quick reference stuff. Actually, I think this was Warhammer 4th edition, now that I look at it. I forget. I think I played Bretonnians back then. And then here is, I'm going to try to be as careful as I can with this book here. Now, Brian Ansell ended up actually owning Games Workshop for a little bit of time, until I think the Kirby-led takeover of the mid-90s kind of happened, and they transformed the company into the powerhouse that it kind of is today. A lot of authors in here, the late Wayne England, Mark Gibbons, who I think works for Blizzard now, Jess Goodwin, of course, fantastic artist John Blanche, which inspired a lot of this stuff in the first place. Then you've got stories by Bill King, Rick Priestley. Some of these folks I don't recognize right off the top of my head. You got Kev Walker in here, Adrian Smith lended a lot of artwork to this. Adrian Smith, of course, came up with a lot of different art for the actual Battle of Terra and the Emperor versus Horus. I think he's done 3 iterations of it. The first is in this book right here. And speaking of the Emperor, the background where we saw in the first book, The Realms of Chaos, Slaves of Darkness, you got the Grey Knights and the Inquisition, a little bit on the Horus Heresy, a lot more on the Horus Heresy in this book. Also the Emperor himself, which will show you some stories, and you can kind of pause and read if that's your thing. I'm not going to read it to you. I'm not that kind of channel here. If you want folks reading stuff to you, well, there's plenty of channels out there for you, of course. But there's a lot of good information in here. Terra, Chaos Cults, the Emperor, the Star Children, which includes the Sensei and the Armies of Chaos, and a lot of different things here that it's really just kind of worth checking out. So there was a key in the first book where you could tell which artist drew what, and I guess they got rid of that. And there was this really interesting kind of ongoing story throughout the book of two brothers who were vying for power and vying for, you know, basically the affections of chaos to become chaos gods, or, you know, demon princes, and kind of turn into that sort of thing. We don't have that kind of background story in here. Everybody is credited for their clip art or their artwork in the margins here. So a little bit different of a feel too. It kind of goes into a brief introduction. Remember, in a lot of cases, the two games had an identity issue. It wasn't necessarily Warhammer 40k, and by this point in 1990, it was starting to form its own identity. In the old book, it was just Rogue Trader, which was like first edition. 2 years later, we got the first second edition set of rules and box set for Warhammer 40k. So this is kind of the midpoint where 40k is kind of starting to take its own identity, but it still is kind of locked together with Warhammer Fantasy Battles, as they called it back then. So you're starting to see where they're not treating them both as the same, and they're kind of separating them out. Now you have Warhammer 40,000, and in here Warhammer Fantasy Battle, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Because remember, the RPG component of these games used to be huge back in the day. So there's a little bit of stories in here about the Horse Heresy and stuff at the beginning, and then the start of the background of Nurgle and Tzeentch and the Great Unclean Ones. And back then they had these little multi-part pewter miniatures where you could choose the different heads and different bodies for these guys, and we'll show them in here. There's a whole section of painted miniatures in here as well, and I'll kind of point those out to you as well. Lots of cool artwork here. This is one of my favorites from Adrian Smith. There's a lot of good Adrian Smith artwork in here. The little plague bearers doing their little plague bearer thing. Nurglings, plague bearers, beasts. You can see the inspiration for the beast of Nurgle right there. And then it goes into the spells and a lot of stuff that isn't very unfamiliar to any of us. The Miasma, the Stream, Plague Wind, Stench of Nurgle, Nurgle's Rot, all that sort of things are really kind of in the hobby still, nearly 30 years later. Cloud of Flies, all that sort of stuff. Very, very cool to see. And here, let's jump over to the Tzeentch section. So here's the Tzeentch section. Going to be the Lords of Change, where they kind of really started developing the kind of bird, dragon thing mans for the Lord of Changes, and then all the little crazy horrors. These weren't quite as developed as what they are today. They did have the split mechanic, which was really cool, which just recently got reintroduced into Warhammer 40k. Zangors are in here. That was the beginning. Flamers, the Discs of Tzeentch, which were, again, you know, just the little rays and stuff, just dudes riding on top of them. Here's some of the horrors and things. Zangors, oh, maybe they're in the back. That's right, they were for Warhammer 40,000. And then it goes into champions and some different sections, and a lot of information in here, which is going to be narrative things for RPG or Warhammer Fantasy. Lots of cool art, though, but nothing that really pertains to anything kind of these days. This section here on the Dark Tongue I thought was interesting. This is the Chaos language, which you would see a lot of the Mortal Servants using and things. And then the Dark Tongue itself, some of the little glyphs and things which you really don't see at all anymore. But this was kind of an interesting little section for me to kind of see again. Numerals and letters and all sorts of crazy stuff. And you wonder where do they actually get all these things from, right? And then it goes into some of the demons and some of the different things like that. We're not going to really spend a lot of time on any of that because time is of the essence, and I want to show you the good stuff, so to speak, in here. Speaking of good stuff, here's some of the old kind of demons with guns and sorcerers on discs, which were literally discs in some cases there. Independent demons, wow, I haven't seen a lot of this stuff in quite some time, to be quite honest. This is all things that are very hard pressed to find anymore. Demons of Tzeentch. Now here's the old horrors. The blue horrors are smaller because they did split off. The old flamers, those are crazy looking. Lord of Change. The Lord of Change and the Great Unclean Ones, you actually had different bodies and different heads, but the overall structure was the same, and they would both go on these 50mm square bases. The same with the Lord of Change here, but they don't show the multiple versions of him, which makes me a little sad. There's a Palanquin of Nurgle, which was probably taken from that great Adrian Smith piece of artwork there, and a Beast of Nurgle with the crazy head. Those models have always been crazy in and of themselves. And the Chaos Champions, this is all stuff that wasn't necessarily 40k, but kind of split the difference between them all. Lots of cool miniatures in here, and just some little dioramas and things of different battles. I haven't seen a lot of this. There's that Moonhead Tzeentch sorcerer that they put in the Warhammer Quest game, another great unclean one. Some of the spawns and stuff. There's some different versions of the Greater Demon, the Great Unclean one, or excuse me, the Lord of Change. There you can see they had a couple different heads, but the wings are still the same. I think those wings were actually shared with one of the Empire Fantasy kits too. Some of the banners and things that you could copy and kind of glue down to different things. They didn't have the little slide technology that they do today, the slide transfer technology. Renegades was kind of interesting because you would find where you could get these models, and this was one of my favorites, the Nurgle Renegade from back in the day, the beginnings of the little sassy Nurglings from way back in 1988, where you could have dudes with like bolt guns and stuff in fantasy, and you could have minotaurs with like crazy weapons, and it just all splashed all over the place. Like I said, they were kind of struggling a little bit for identity, but eventually they found it. And some of these miniatures, if you ever get your hands on them, besides being a little bit of a giggle, you know, they're kind of cool to just have like as a little piece of history, so to speak, you know, right there. And then it gets into Chaos Warbands, some of the different things with like how to actually field them for Warhammer Fantasy, but there's a whole bunch of different options and things in here. Beastmen, some of the stuff like Chaos Dwarfs, like the big dragon ogres and the centaurs, and then actually I had an undead component in here as well. Let's see if we can find him. There's the dragon ogres, and there was some undead stuff. Oh, the beginnings of the Chaos Cultists, that's in the 40k section. I guess I overshot it, but there's the Eye of Terror stuff, and that was actually a miniature. There it is, the Undead Champions of Chaos from Warhammer Fantasy. And then it gets into the Eye of Terror and explains all that, like, you know, how time is different and all of those crazy things. And I'll just leave this up here so you can just, you know, kind of pause it and read it if you want. I'm sure it's going to be HD quality so you can actually sit here and read it. Here's another one. And this page here, which is a little bit more of not really stuff that's meant for reading or background fluff. Another great piece of artwork by Adrian Smith. Chaos Cultists, they could be everywhere. They could be Imperial, Space Marines, all sorts of different things. You could roll on them. They were led by Chaos Magus. And then it gets into the Emperor, the coming of the Emperor. Not necessarily a lot of you know, identity stuff, but just basically where he was, where he came from. A lot of stuff has been retconned, unfortunately. Obviously, pause it and you can read some of this, but this necessarily isn't going to line up with the things that you think you might know about the Emperor. Then it gets into the birth of Slaanesh and all that stuff with the Eldar that we all have come to know. The Primarchs, obviously Leman Russ right there with his two wolves. That was an actual model back in the day as well that looked just like that. Well, actually, no, he didn't have the wolves chained to him. The Horus Heresy, the Death of Horus, the Golden Throne, and by this point, and here's that first piece of great artwork by Adrian Smith, the Emperor versus Horus. Now, he did one in 2005, roughly, you know, 15 years later, that a lot of people have framed. I know I have one here with me right now, as a matter of fact, and then we have a more recent piece that's a more dynamic kind of pose that Adrian Smith also did, I believe, with Sanguinius, you know, lying in a pool of his own blood with his wings all up, and kind of Horus and the Emperor kind of in a very dynamic pose kind of type deal, instead of just the Emperor coming up the steps like he is in this picture. Like I said, Sanguinius had made his appearance into this actual piece of fluff right here, well, before it was Alonius the Pious, or Ali P, was the one that distracted Horus, or showed the Emperor that the Horus had truly been lost. But now the Sanguinius had made his way into this. And then, of course, the Star Child, This stuff about the Sensei being the children of the Emperor, or the descendants of the Emperor's descendants, and so on and so forth. And you could actually field them in an adventure band, a little war band, because remember, Warhammer 40k wasn't the huge tabletop game it is right now. It was more of a skirmish type game with an RPG kind of component to it. And here's all the rules for all that. And wizards tables and things that don't even pertain to anything that we know currently right now. Now let's get to some more of the Nerville stuff, seeing as how demons are back here in 8th edition 40k. This is stuff about Chaos Knights and things for fantasy. We don't necessarily need all this. There is a demon section. Plague skeletons, those would be cool to have right now, but nope, we got plague zombies. And remember back then, desktop publishing was actually a thing. Look at all this. Look at this crazy font they fit in here. Could you imagine looking up rules on that? We act like we got it tough now because we got to flip to the back of the book to get points values. Could you imagine having to get out reading glasses to read all this? Holy cow. Armies of Tzeentch. More stuff in here on Warhammer Fantasy. The Blasted Standard is something we saw in the past in 5th edition. Lots of cool stuff in here. This is all Warhammer Fantasy stuff. There's the Zangors. There's another entry in here with them with a bolter too. I don't necessarily know where it is though. Oh, here it is. Creating demonic legion armies. Trying to remember where all this stuff is. Great Unclean One, Plague Bearers. This is all the points for all that. Nurglings. I think it's in the Tzeentch section. I think it's coming up. Flamers. Another piece of great Adrian Smith artwork there. A dude with a shield and a spear, but this guy has a bolter. Like, what is going on here? Hey, somebody get that guy some equipment. Random generation of warbands. I may have misspoken. I swore. And this is all the stuff for 40k now. And the Renegades. I forget where that Zangor is. I know he's in here. There he is. There's a Zangor with a bolter. So these guys, we just recently saw them come back with the Wrath of Magnus stuff about, I guess, December of 2016, a little over a year ago. But this is where they came from. They're basically Space Beastmen. And strangely enough, they actually have rules for Orc Freebooters mob in here. Remember these guys? They would work for anybody. They're mercenaries. Chaos Squats. He said squats, reset the clock. And lots of more stuff in here on the Realms of Chaos, and eventually we get to the back of the book, and it's all stuff that doesn't matter anymore as far as followers and tables and casualty recovery and creatures and things, and none of this stuff really super matters anymore, but it's kind of cool to read through the fluff and look at the artwork and kind of get a appreciation for where a lot of this lore and fluff and design elements actually came from. Now, if you liked a look at this Realm of Chaos Lost in the Dam, you can get these on eBay. These books go for around $100 to $200 depending on the quality of the book. Now, GW just started doing reprints. They may have them available at Adepticon this year here in the States. Maybe Nova Open, I'm not sure. Still haven't seen the quality of the one that came out of England. Not sure if they're going to have a dust jacket. This particular book here from my friend Matt has a dust jacket. I do not remember if they both came with dust jackets. Unfortunately, this one does not. But that being said, these are for being nearly, well, this one is 30 years old this year. This one here is nearly 30 years old. I think knowing that these could see daily use and abuse, I think these are in a very good quality for what they are right there. So special thanks to my friend Matt for allowing me to record these bad boys and share them with you. Now, if you like these type of features, every week we try to run a fantastic retro or our hobby showcase on something cool we have found or we currently have in our possession here in the studio. So make sure you work out your hobby muscles and mash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you can be the very first to like and comment on these videos.
Deleted scenes, bonus content, and all the interviews and post-game wrap-up videos can be located in the Hall of Veterans on thelongwar.net. Visit thelongwar.net today and try a week completely free with no strings attached. That's not all. Thelongwar.net is also your hobby resource for exclusive early access with an ad-free experience to all your favorite videos. Members of the Hall of Veterans gain early exclusive access to multiple hobby videos.